On a quiet night, the doors of a hospital opened to an unexpected visitor. An exhausted dog entered, carrying something delicately in its mouth. The nurses, incredulous, discovered a baby fighting to survive. What happened next was a lesson in love, courage, and hope. Before hearing this emotional story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more inspiring stories. On a quiet night, the routine of a hospital was interrupted by an unbelievable scene. The automatic doors of the main entrance opened slowly, revealing an exhausted and dirty dog. His eyes carried a mix of desperation and determination, and, in his mouth, he carefully held a small bundle wrapped in an old cloth. The nurses, initially paralyzed by shock, ran to see what the animal was bringing. When they opened the bundle, they felt the air leave the room. Inside was a fragile and weakened baby, fighting to survive. Nurse Sarah, who was on duty that night, was the first to react. With years of emergency experience, she quickly took the baby in her arms and called for help. "We need a doctor here now. We have a newborn in critical condition." Dr. Thomas, the pediatrician on duty, arrived in seconds, assessing the situation with experienced eyes. "Let's take him to the NICU immediately," he ordered, his firm voice masking the concern he felt. While the medical team rushed through the corridors with the baby, the dog remained at the entrance, his tired eyes following the frantic movement. Receptionist Emily, moved by the scene, approached him cautiously. "Hey, buddy," she murmured, extending her hand. "You did a great job." The dog, despite his battered appearance, showed no aggression. On the contrary, he rested his head on Emily's hand, as if seeking comfort after completing his mission. In the NICU, Dr. Thomas and his team worked tirelessly to stabilize the baby. "He's severely dehydrated and malnourished," the doctor informed, connecting the little one to various machines. "We need intravenous hydration and constant monitoring of vital signs." Sarah, now watching the procedure, couldn't contain her emotions. "Doctor, how could this happen? Who would leave a baby in these conditions?" Dr. Thomas shook his head, concentrating on his task. "We don't know, Sarah, but right now, our priority is keeping him alive. Questions will have to wait." Meanwhile, at reception, Emily had managed to convince the dog to come inside. She improvised a bed with old blankets in a quiet corner and offered water and some pieces of bread she found in her bag. "You must be exhausted, boy," she whispered, stroking his dirty ears. Security guard Jack, intrigued by the situation, approached. "Emily, I've already called the police," he informed. "They're on their way to investigate the case." Emily nodded, her gaze alternating between the dog and the corridor leading to the NICU. "Jack, have you ever seen anything like this before? A dog bringing a baby to the hospital?" The security guard, with his 30 years of experience, shook his head. "Never, Emily. I thought I'd seen everything in this hospital, but this is something completely new." The following hours were tense. In the NICU, Dr. Thomas and his team fought to stabilize the baby, while at reception, Emily and Jack took turns caring for the dog and dealing with the arrival of the police. When the investigators arrived, led by Detective Rachel Carter, the hospital was already in an uproar with news of the mysterious baby. Rachel, a middle-aged woman with keen eyes, immediately began collecting information. "So let me understand," she said, her professional tone masking her disbelief. "A dog appeared at the hospital entrance carrying a baby?" Emily confirmed, pointing to the dog now sleeping in the corner. "Exactly, Detective. He seemed to know exactly what he was doing." Rachel approached the animal, studying it carefully. There was no collar or visible identification. "And the baby? Any information about his condition?" At that moment, Sarah came out of the NICU looking exhausted but relieved. "The baby is stable for now," she informed. "It's a boy, probably a few weeks old. He was severely dehydrated and malnourished, but Dr. Thomas believes he will recover." Rachel nodded, making quick notes. "Any signs of physical abuse?" Sarah shook her head. "No, just severe neglect. It's as if he hadn't been fed properly for days." The detective frowned, her mind already working on the possibilities. "We need to find out where this baby came from and how this dog fits into the story." While Rachel organized her team to begin searches in the area around the hospital, Dr. Thomas came out of the NICU to give an update. The baby is responding well to treatment, he informed, but he's not out of danger yet. The next 24 hours will be crucial. Rachel took the opportunity to question the doctor. Doctor, in your professional opinion, how long was this baby without proper care? Dr. Thomas hesitated for a moment, considering. It's hard to say for sure, but given the state he arrived in, I'd say at least 3 to 4 days without adequate feeding. The revelation sent a shockwave through the team. How could such a small child survive so long in such conditions? Rachel, sensing the gravity of the situation, turned her attention back to the dog. We need to use this dog to track where he came from, she decided. It's our best chance of finding answers. Jack, who had remained silent until then, spoke up. Detective, I don't know if it's a good idea to wake him up now. He looks completely exhausted. Rachel pondered for a moment, looking at the sleeping animal. It was true, the dog looked like he had been through quite an ordeal. You're right, she agreed. Let's let him rest for a few hours. In the meantime, I'll organize a team to search the area. Maybe we'll find some clues. While the police began their searches, the hospital continued in a state of controlled agitation. Nurses and doctors frequently passed through reception, casting curious glances at the hero dog sleeping peacefully. Emily, unable to leave her post, asked a colleague to bring some old clothes from the donation sector. She improvised a more comfortable bed for the dog, placing a soft blanket under him without waking him up. As night fell, the story of the baby rescued by a dog began to spread. Journalists started to arrive, eager for details, but were kept at a distance by the hospital security team. In the middle of the night, the dog finally woke up. He rose slowly, seeming disoriented for a moment. Emily, who was nearby, approached carefully. "Hey, buddy," she called softly. "How are you feeling?" The dog looked at her, his eyes tired but alert. He stretched and then, to Emily's surprise, walked towards the hospital exit. "Wait!" Emily called, alerting Jack. "I think he wants to go." "Out!" Rachel, who had returned from a round, heard the commotion. "Perfect," she said. "Let's follow him. This might be our chance to find some answers." Carefully, they opened the hospital doors. The dog went out, stopping to look back, as if checking if they were following. Rachel, Emily, and 2 police officers began to follow him, maintaining a respectful distance. The dog led them through the dark city streets, his pace determined despite evident fatigue. They passed through residential neighborhoods, crossed a park, and finally arrived at a more run-down area of the city. "We're approaching Hope Valley," one of the officers informed. "It's an area known to have many families in vulnerable situations." The dog stopped in front of a small deteriorated house. The paint was peeling, and the garden was overgrown with tall weeds. He looked at the group and barked once, as if saying, "It's here!" Rachel approached cautiously, her hand instinctively going to her gun. "Stay alert," she instructed her team. Upon reaching the door, she noticed it was ajar. With a gesture, she called for silence and slowly entered the house. The interior was a scene of abandonment and despair. Dusty furniture, spoiled food remains in the kitchen sink, and in the corner of the living room, an old and dirty crib. Rachel felt her heart tighten as she saw an empty bottle fallen beside the crib. "My God," Emily whispered, looking around with wide eyes. Rachel continued her inspection, noticing a dog food bowl on the kitchen floor and a folded blanket next to the crib. It was evident that the dog spent a lot of time near the baby, but it was what she found on the kitchen table that made Rachel catch her breath. A letter, handwritten on a crumpled piece of paper. She read it aloud. "I don't have the strength to care for him anymore. I've lost everything. But I know he'll be in good hands. I hope someday they'll forgive me." The silence that followed was heavy, laden with conflicting emotions. Emily, with tears in her eyes, knelt down to pet the dog. "You saved that baby," she murmured. "You're a true hero." Rachel carefully stored the letter in an evidence bag. "We need to find the mother," she declared. "She might be in danger or need help." As the forensic team began to process the scene, Rachel couldn't help but think about the courage and loyalty of that dog. Amidst so much hopelessness, he had become a beacon of hope. not just for the baby but for everyone who heard his story. The day was dawning when they left the house. The dog, now more relaxed, walked beside Emily. Rachel looked at the horizon where the first rays of sun were beginning to appear. This investigation was far from over, but one thing was certain. The journey that began with an act of desperation had transformed into a story of unexpected courage, love, and hope. The sun was already high in the sky when Detective Rachel Carter returned to the hospital. Her tired eyes reflected the sleepless night, but her determination remained unshaken. As she entered reception, she was greeted by Emily, who looked equally exhausted but anxious for news. "Any progress, Detective?" asked Emily, offering a cup of coffee that Rachel accepted gratefully. Rachel sighed, taking a sip of coffee before responding. "We're following some leads, but we still haven't found the mother. The house gave us some valuable information, but it also raised more questions." At that moment, Dr. Thomas appeared in the hallway, his face showing signs of a long night of work. "Detective, glad you're here. I have news about the baby." Rachel and Emily followed the doctor to the NICU. Through the glass they could see the small patient, now with color in his cheeks and breathing more steadily. "He's responding well to treatment," explained Dr. Thomas. "We've managed to stabilize his condition, and he's started to accept feeding. He's a fighter." Rachel observed the baby for a moment, feeling a mix of relief and concern. "Doctor, were you able to determine his exact age?" The doctor nodded. "Based on the exams we've done, we estimate he's about 3 weeks old, which makes it even more surprising that he survived in those conditions." The detective made some notes in her notepad. "And what about birthmarks, distinctive features, anything that might help us identify him?" "He has a small birthmark on the nape of his neck, shaped like a half moon," replied Dr. Thomas. "Other than that, nothing that stands out." Rachel thanked him for the information and turned to Emily. "And our canine hero, how is he?" Emily smiled for the first time that morning. "He's doing well. We gave him a bath, and the hospital veterinarian examined him. Despite the fatigue and being a bit thin, he's healthy. We're calling him Max." "Max," repeated Rachel thoughtfully, "a good name for a hero." As they were talking, Sarah, the nurse who had been on duty the previous night, approached the group. Her face showed a mixture of excitement and apprehension. "Detective," she called, her voice low but urgent, "I think I found something that might help with the investigation." Rachel turned her attention to the nurse. "What did you discover?" "Sarah?" Sarah hesitated for a moment, looking around to ensure no one else was listening. "I was organizing the baby's belongings, you know, the blanket he was wrapped in when he arrived, and I found this sewn into the hem." She extended her hand, revealing a small folded piece of paper. Rachel carefully took the paper, using gloves to avoid contaminating potential evidence. As she unfolded it, her eyes widened. It was a faded and crumpled photograph. In it, a young woman smiled, holding a bouquet of flowers. Beside her, a man in military uniform embraced her. On the back of the photo, a date and 2 handwritten words: "Forever yours." "This could be crucial," said Rachel, storing the photo in an evidence bag. "Good work, Sarah. This might give us the lead we need to identify the baby's parents." Meanwhile, on the other side of town, the search for the mother continued. Rachel's team had distributed posters with a description of the woman based on the little information they had. Neighbors of the abandoned house were interviewed, but no one seemed to have concrete information about the mysterious resident. Back at the hospital, Max had become a sort of local celebrity. Staff and patients stopped to see him, many bringing treats and toys. The dog, though still cautious, seemed to be adapting well to the hospital environment. Rachel decided to use the media to her advantage. With the hospital's approval, she organized a press conference for early afternoon. Journalists from various networks gathered at the hospital entrance, eager for details of the story that was already capturing the public's imagination. "Good morning, everyone," Rachel began, her voice firm in front of the cameras. "We're here to ask for the community's help in an unprecedented case. Last night, a dog brought a newborn baby to this hospital, saving its life." She paused, letting the information sink in before continuing. The baby is now receiving necessary care and recovering well. However, we still haven't been able to locate his mother. We believe she may be in danger or in need of urgent assistance. Rachel then showed an enlarged copy of the photograph that had been found. This image was discovered among the baby's belongings. If anyone recognizes the people in this photo, please contact the police immediately. Any information, no matter how small it may seem, could be crucial. While the press conference was happening inside the hospital, Emily was sitting on the floor of the reception area, playing with Max. The dog, though still alert, seemed more relaxed, occasionally licking Emily's hand in a gesture of affection. "You're a good boy, aren't you?" Emily murmured, scratching behind Max's ears. "Save that little baby. I wish I could understand how you knew what to do." As if understanding her words, Max raised his head, his eyes meeting Emily's. For a moment, she had the sensation that there was an almost human depth in that gaze. The moment was interrupted when Jack, the security guard, approached hurriedly. "Emily, you need to see this," he said, pointing to the television in the reception area. On the screen, a reporter was standing in front of a park not far from the hospital. "We're receiving information that a woman was found unconscious in this park just minutes ago," she reported. "Witnesses say she matches the description released by the police regarding the dog baby case, as it's being called." Emily felt her heart race. "Jack, do you think—" Before she could finish her sentence, Max abruptly stood up, his ears perked and body tense. He began to bark, looking from the television to the hospital door. "I think he wants to go there," said Jack, surprised by the dog's reaction. At that moment, Rachel rushed into reception. "I just received the news," she said, breathless. "I'm heading to the park now." Emily stood up, an idea forming in her mind. "Detective, what if we take Max with us? He seems to have understood something about the news." Rachel hesitated for a moment, but seeing the dog's agitation, she nodded. "All right, but he stays in the car with me. We can't risk contaminating a possible crime scene." Quickly, they headed to Rachel's police car. Max entered without hesitation, sitting in the back seat as if he knew exactly what was happening. The journey to the park was tense, with Rachel driving quickly through the city streets. Emily, seated beside her, couldn't stop looking back at Max, who was sitting alert and anxious. Upon arriving at the park, they saw a small crowd forming around an area cordoned off by police. Rachel parked the car and turned to Emily. "Stay here with Max. I'll see what's going on." Emily nodded, watching Rachel get out of the car and run towards the scene. Max began to whimper, his agitation visibly increasing. "Calm down, boy," Emily tried to soothe him, though she herself was nervous. "We'll find out what's happening." The minutes that followed seemed to drag on. Emily observed the commotion from a distance, trying to decipher what was happening. She saw when an ambulance arrived and paramedics rushed in with a stretcher. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, Rachel returned to the car. Her face was serious, but there was a glimmer of hope in her eyes. "It's her," Rachel said, simply. "The description matches perfectly with the mother we've been looking for. She's alive but in critical condition. They're taking her to the hospital now." Emily felt a wave of emotions wash over her: relief, concern, hope. "And now?" she asked. Rachel started the car, preparing to follow the ambulance. "Now we go back to the hospital, and we hope she recovers enough to tell us her story." As they followed the ambulance back to the hospital, Emily couldn't help but notice how Max had calmed down. The dog was lying in the back seat, his eyes fixed on the ambulance ahead as if he were standing guard. The journey back to the hospital was silent, each occupant of the car lost in their own thoughts. Emily reflected on the extraordinary events of the last 24 hours, on how life could change so drastically in such a short time. Rachel, for her part, mentally reviewed the next steps of the investigation. Even with the mother found, there were still many unanswered questions. Who was the father? Why had the mother abandoned the baby? And how, in the midst of all this chaos, had a dog become the unlikely hero of this story? When they arrived at the hospital, they saw that the medical team was already prepared, waiting for the ambulance's arrival. Dr. Thomas was at the forefront, giving quick instructions to his team. Rachel parked the car and turned to Emily. "Stay with Max. I'll go with her admission and see if I can get any information." Emily nodded, stroking Max's head as she watched Rachel run towards the emergency entrance. The ambulance arrived seconds later, and Emily saw when the paramedics removed the stretcher with the unconscious woman. For a brief moment, Emily could see the woman's face. She was pale and haggard, but even so, Emily recognized the features from the photo they had found. It was her, without a doubt. Max, who had been calm until then, started whimpering again. Emily hugged him, feeling the tension in the animal's body. "It's okay, boy," she murmured. "She's getting help now. Thanks to you." As the medical team rushed inside the hospital with the woman, Emily couldn't help but think about how this story was far from over. The baby, the mother, the mysterious, absent father, and the loyal Max, all elements of a drama that continued to unfold before her eyes. With a sigh, Emily opened the car door, letting Max out. Together, they walked towards the hospital entrance, ready to face whatever came next in this extraordinary journey. The sun was beginning to set on the horizon, painting the sky with shades of orange and pink. Emily looked at Max, who walked confidently by her side, and smiled. Amid all the uncertainty, one thing was clear. This extraordinary dog had changed many lives today, and his story was far from over. The hospital was in a state of controlled agitation when Emily and Max entered. Nurses and doctors were running back and forth, their voices mixing in an urgent murmur. Emily could feel the tension in the air, almost palpable. She headed to the reception desk where Sarah was standing, her eyes fixed on the corridor leading to the emergency room. "Any news?" Emily asked, her voice low. Sarah shook her head. "Not yet. Detective Rachel is in there with the doctors. The woman was in critical condition when she arrived." Max, sitting obediently beside Emily, let out a small whimper, as if understanding the gravity of the situation. Emily crouched down to caress his ears, seeking comfort in the dog's constant presence. "And the baby?" Emily asked, suddenly remembering the small life that had initiated this whole saga. "Stable," Sarah replied, a slight smile appearing on her tired face. "Dr. Thomas said he's responding well to treatment. He's a real fighter." At that moment, the emergency room doors opened, and Rachel came out, her face a mask of professionalism, but Emily could see the concern in her eyes. "How is she?" Emily asked, quickly standing up. Rachel sighed, running her hand through her disheveled hair. "She's alive, but her condition is critical. Severe malnutrition, dehydration. The doctors are doing their best, but the next few hours will be decisive." Did she say anything?" Sarah asked hesitantly. Rachel shook her head. "Not yet. She's unconscious, but—" She hesitated, looking around to make sure no one else was listening. "We found something when they were treating her. A tattoo on her wrist, a name, Jason." Emily and Sarah exchanged glances. "The father," Emily suggested. "Possibly," Rachel agreed. "It's our best lead so far. I'm going to put my team on investigating. Maybe we can find some record of this Jason related to our Jane Doe." The sound of hurried footsteps interrupted the conversation. Dr. Thomas appeared, his face showing signs of exhaustion, but with a glimmer of determination in his eyes. "Detective," he called, "we need to talk, in private." Rachel nodded, following the doctor to a more secluded corner of the corridor. Emily and Sarah observed the conversation from a distance, trying to interpret their facial expressions. After a few minutes that seemed like an eternity, Rachel returned, her face a mixture of conflicting emotions. "What was it?" Emily asked, unable to contain her curiosity. Rachel hesitated for a moment before answering. "Dr. Thomas did some additional tests on the mother. She gave birth recently. Very recently." Emily felt her heart tighten. "You mean—" "Yes," Rachel confirmed, her voice low. "She had another baby, probably a twin." The shock of the revelation hung over the group like a heavy cloud. Max, sensing the change in atmosphere, let out a low bark, drawing everyone's attention. "My God," Sarah whispered, her hand covering her mouth. "Where's the other baby?" Rachel shook her head, frustration evident in her voice. "We don't know. There were no signs of another baby in the house, but this would explain why she was in such a critical state, giving birth to twins alone, without medical assistance." Emily felt a wave of nausea as she imagined the scenario. "We have to find the other baby," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "If it's in the same condition as the brother when he arrived here." "I know," Rachel interrupted, her tone urgent. "I've already activated all available units. We're combing the area around the house again, expanding the search perimeter." At that moment, Max began to bark insistently, pulling on the leash Emily was holding. He looked from the hospital door to the group, as if trying to communicate something. "What is it, boy?" Emily asked, kneeling beside the dog. Max continued barking, his body tense with excitement. Rachel observed the animal's behavior for a moment, an idea forming in her mind. "Emily," she said slowly, "do you think Max could lead us to the other baby?" Emily looked at the dog, remembering how he had found his way to the hospital with the first baby. "It's possible," she replied, hope growing in her voice. "He seems to understand much more than we imagine." Rachel made a quick decision. "All right, let's try. Emily, you come with me and bring Max. Sarah, please inform Dr. Thomas about the situation and ask him to prepare the NICU for a possible second admission." Sarah nodded, running towards the NICU, while Rachel, Emily and Max quickly headed for the police car. The sun had already set completely, plunging the city into shadows. The streets were almost empty when they left the hospital, with Max sitting anxiously in the back seat. "Where to, boy?" Emily murmured, turning to look at the dog. Max barked once, his eyes fixed on the road ahead. Rachel drove slowly, allowing Max to guide their way through barks and whines. They passed by the abandoned house where the first baby had been found, continuing through narrow and poorly lit streets. After almost half an hour of tense driving, Max started barking furiously. They had reached an abandoned industrial area, with empty warehouses and lots surrounded by barbed wire. "Here?" Rachel asked, parking the car. Max barked in confirmation, scratching at the car door in his anxiety to get out. Emily and Rachel exchanged apprehensive looks before exiting the vehicle. The air was cold and damp, heavy with the smell of rusty metal and abandoned vegetation. "Stay close," Rachel instructed, drawing her gun as a precaution, "and keep Max under control." They followed the dog, who was insistently pulling on the leash, his nose glued to the ground. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the occasional sound of metal creaking in the wind. Finally, Max stopped in front of a particularly deteriorated warehouse. The metal door was ajar, creaking softly. Rachel signaled for Emily to stay back as she approached the entrance, her gun at the ready. Carefully, she pushed the door, which opened with a high-pitched groan. The interior of the warehouse was dark, illuminated only by the weak light entering through dirty windows. Rachel turned on her cell phone flashlight, scanning the environment. The beam of light revealed piles of dusty boxes, abandoned machines, and a subtle movement in a distant corner. "There," Emily whispered, pointing. Rachel advanced cautiously, her heart pounding in her chest. When she got closer, she saw it. Wrapped in a dirty blanket, a small bundle was moving slightly. With trembling hands, Rachel pulled back the blanket, revealing a tiny baby, its eyes closed and its breathing weak, but present. "Oh my God," Emily gasped, tears forming in her eyes. "It's alive." Rachel quickly checked the baby's vital signs. "It's freezing," she said, her voice urgent. "We need to get it to the hospital immediately." Emily took off her jacket, carefully wrapping the baby. Max watched everything, his tail wagging slowly, as if understanding that his mission had been accomplished. They ran back to the car, Rachel driving at high speed, while Emily held the baby, trying to warm it with her own body. "Hang in there, we're almost there," Rachel murmured, more to herself than to the other occupants of the car. When they arrived at the hospital, a medical team was already waiting for them at the entrance, alerted by a quick call Rachel had made during the journey. Dr. Thomas took the baby from Emily's arms, running inside with his team. "Severe hypothermia, possible dehydration," he shouted orders as he disappeared down the corridor. Emily, Rachel, and Max stood at the entrance, the adrenaline of the search giving way to profound exhaustion. "You did it, boy," Emily murmured, kneeling to hug Max. The dog gently licked her face as if wanting to comfort her. Rachel observed the scene, a small smile forming on her lips, despite the gravity of the situation. "I think we need to revise our definition of hero," she commented. The following hours were a mixture of anxious waiting and frantic activity. While the medical teams fought to stabilize both the mother and the second baby, Rachel coordinated the investigation, seeking any information about the mysterious Jason and the woman's past. Emily remained at the hospital, unable to leave Max or abandon the vigil for the babies and their mother. She alternated between the NICU, where the twins were now side by side, and the waiting room where other hospital staff occasionally joined her, all captured by the extraordinary story unfolding. It was almost dawn when Dr. Thomas appeared, exhaustion evident on his face, but with a glimmer of hope in his eyes. "They're going to survive," he announced, his voice hoarse from exhaustion. "All three of them. The mother is responding well to treatment, and the twins, well, they're fighters just like her." A collective sigh of relief went through the group. Emily felt tears of joy escape her eyes, and even Rachel, usually so composed, seemed emotional. "When can we talk to her?" Rachel asked, her detective, instinct never really sleeping. Dr. Thomas shook his head. "Not so soon. She's still unconscious, and even when she wakes up, she'll need time to recover. Both, physically and emotionally." Rachel nodded, understanding. "And the babies, will they be okay?" "It's too early to say for sure," the doctor responded honestly, "but they're resilient. The fact that they've survived this long, well, it's almost a miracle." Emily, who had remained silent, finally spoke. "It wasn't just a miracle," she said softly, looking at Max, who was sleeping peacefully at her feet. "It was love, the love of a desperate mother and the loyalty of an extraordinary dog." The group fell silent for a moment, absorbing the weight of those words. The story of that family, so close to tragedy, had touched everyone in ways they could barely comprehend. Rachel cleared her throat, breaking the silence. "Well, our work is far from over. We still have to find out who this woman is, locate this Jason, understand what led to all this. But for now," Emily gently interrupted, "we can rejoice that we have 3 lives saved, and maybe this is a chance for a new beginning, for all of us." As the sun rose, casting its first golden rays through the hospital windows, the group shared a moment of silent hope. The journey had been long and difficult, but like the first rays of morning, a new light was beginning to shine on this extraordinary story. Max, as if sensing the change in the atmosphere, raised his head and looked at Emily, his eyes full of a wisdom that transcended words. In that moment, everyone understood that sometimes heroes come in the most unexpected forms, and that love and loyalty can overcome even the darkest challenges. The story was far from over, but a new chapter, full of possibilities and hope, was just beginning. The days that followed at the hospital were a mixture of exhaustion and hope. News of the miracle babies and the heroic dog had spread quickly, turning the hospital into a center of media attention. Journalists crowded at the entrance, eager for any updates on the condition of the mother and twins. Rachel, determined to maintain the family's privacy and the integrity of the investigation, had established a security perimeter around the hospital. She spent most of her time divided between the hospital and the police station, coordinating searches for information about the woman's identity and the mysterious Jason. Emily, in turn, had become a constant presence at the hospital. When not on her regular shift, she volunteered to care for the twins, or simply sat beside the still unconscious mother's bed, Max faithfully by her side. It was on a quiet afternoon, almost a week after the rescue of the second baby, that the EQ situation began to change. Emily was in the NICU observing the twins through the glass when she heard a commotion coming from the corridor. "She's waking up!" shouted a nurse, running towards the mother's room. Emily's heart leaped. She turned. To Max, who was already alert, his ears perked up. "Come on, boy," she murmured, hurrying down the corridor. When they reached the room, Dr. Thomas was already there, leaning over the patient's bed. The woman, pale and visibly weak, was blinking slowly, her disoriented eyes scanning the environment. Where am I?" she asked, her voice hoarse and low. Dr. Thomas smiled gently. "You're in the hospital, ma'am. You're safe now." The woman frowned, confused. Then suddenly her eyes widened in panic. "My babies! Where are my babies?" Emily stepped forward, her voice soft and reassuring. "They're okay. They're here in the hospital receiving the best care." The woman visibly relaxed, tears starting to stream down her cheeks. They're alive." "Yes," Dr. Thomas confirmed, "thanks to you and a very special friend." At that moment, Max, who had remained quiet until then, stepped forward, his tail wagging softly. The woman looked at the dog, her eyes filling with recognition and gratitude. "Rusty," she whispered, extending a trembling hand towards the animal. Max approached, gently licking her fingers. Emily and Dr. Thomas exchanged surprised looks. "Rusty?" Emily asked softly. The woman nodded, a small smile appearing on her lips. "Yes, that's his name. My faithful Rusty." Before they could ask more questions, Rachel entered the room, her expression a mixture of relief and professional determination. "Gentlemen," she said, addressing Dr. Thomas and Emily, "may I have a moment alone with our patient?" The doctor hesitated. "Detective, she just woke up. I'm not sure if she's in a condition to—" "It's okay," the woman interrupted, her voice weak but firm. I want to talk." Rachel nodded, grateful. As the others left the room, Emily paused at the door, looking at Max. "Rusty," she called softly, "let's go." To her surprise, the dog didn't move. He looked at the woman in the bed, then back at Emily, as if asking permission to stay. The woman smiled weakly. "He can stay," she said. "Please." Rachel agreed, and Emily left, gently closing the door behind her. In the corridor, she found Dr. Thomas and Sarah, both anxious for news. "Well?" Sarah asked, barely able to contain her curiosity. Emily sighed, running her hand through her hair. "She woke up. She seems lucid," remembers the dog. "Called him Rusty." Dr. Thomas nodded thoughtfully. "Well, that's a good sign. Her memory seems to be intact, which is positive considering the trauma she's been through." Inside the room, Rachel pulled a chair close to the bed, her notepad ready. "Ma'am," she began gently, "I know you've been through a lot, but we need some information. Can you tell us your name?" The woman hesitated for a moment, her eyes filling with tears again. "Amanda," she finally answered. "My name is Amanda Parker." Rachel noted the name, feeling a mix of relief and apprehension. Finally, they had an identity, but this was just the beginning. "Amanda," she continued, "can you tell me what happened? How did you and your babies end up in that situation?" Amanda closed her eyes for a moment, as if gathering strength. Rusty, sensing her distress, rested his head on her hand. She opened her eyes, stroking the dog's ears as she began to speak. I had nowhere to go," she began, her voice trembling. "Jason, the father of my children, he abandoned us when he found out I was pregnant with twins." Rachel frowned. "Jason? Do you have his full name?" Amanda shook her head. "Jason Thompson. We met about a year ago. He was in the military. On leave when we met. Everything happened so fast." As Amanda continued her story, Rachel took notes furiously. The story that unfolded was one of love, betrayal, and desperation. Jason, upon discovering the twin pregnancy, panicked. He was about to be sent on an overseas mission and didn't feel ready to be a father, much less to 2 babies. "He just disappeared," Amanda continued, her voice breaking. "One day he was there, promising we'd be together. The next, he was gone. He left only a note saying he was sorry, but he couldn't handle it." Rachel felt a wave of anger growing inside her. How could someone abandon their family like that? "And after that?" she asked softly. Amanda took a deep breath. "I tried to manage on my own. I got a job as a cleaner, but when my belly started to grow, well, It became difficult. I ended up losing the job in the apartment I was renting. That's when I found that abandoned house. She looked at Rusty, a sad smile on her lips. Rusty found me there. He was a stray dog, but he started bringing me food. Pieces of bread, sometimes even some fruit he got from who knows where. He kept me alive. Rachel felt a lump in her throat. The loyalty of that animal was something extraordinary. And the birth? She asked hesitantly. Amanda's eyes filled with terror as she remembered. It was horrible. I was alone with nothing to ease the pain. Rusty stayed by my side the whole time, barking when the contractions got stronger, as if he wanted to encourage me. She paused, taking a deep breath before continuing. When the first baby was born, I barely had the strength to hold him. Rusty, he licked the baby, helped clean him. But then the contractions started again, and I passed out. Rachel leaned forward, her voice gentle. What happened next, Amanda? When I woke up, Amanda continued, her voice almost a whisper, there was blood everywhere. The second baby, he wasn't breathing. I tried to do something, but I was so weak. Rusty started barking desperately, and then he took the first baby by the blanket and ran out. Tears were now flowing freely down Amanda's face. I thought I had lost them both, that Rusty had run away with my baby. I wanted to go after him, but I could barely move. I spent days drifting in and out of consciousness, waiting to die. Rachel felt her heart tighten. The story was even more tragic than they had imagined. But you didn't die, Amanda, and your two babies are alive. Amanda looked at Rachel, her eyes widening. Both of them? Rachel nodded, a soft smile on her lips. Yes, Rusty brought the first baby to the hospital, and then he led us to the second. They're both in the NICU now, receiving the best care. Amanda covered her mouth with her hands, sobbing with relief and disbelief. Rusty stood up, putting his head on her lap, as if to comfort her. Can I see them? Amanda asked between sobs. Rachel looked at the door, where Dr. Thomas had discreetly entered. He nodded slightly. As soon as you're a little stronger, Rachel promised. For now, you need to rest and recover. As Amanda calmed down, cradled by Rusty's affection, Rachel felt a mix of emotions. The story was far from over. There was still Jason to find, legal issues to resolve, and a long road to recovery ahead for Amanda and the babies. But at that moment, looking at the exhausted woman in the bed and the loyal dog by her side, Rachel felt a wave of determination. She would do everything in her power to ensure this family had a chance at a new beginning. Quietly leaving the room, Rachel found Emily, Sarah, and Dr. Thomas anxiously waiting in the corridor. Well? Emily asked, her voice barely disguising her concern. Rachel sighed, running her hand over her tired face. It's a long story, she began, but now we know who she is, and we have a name. For the children's father. As Rachel shared the details of the conversation with the team, they all felt the weight of the responsibility they had ahead. This wasn't just another investigation or medical case. It was the story of a broken family, of betrayed love, and of uncommon courage, both human and animal. The sun was beginning to set outside, casting golden shadows through the hospital corridors. Inside Amanda's room, Rusty settled beside the bed, his watchful eyes fixed on the woman he had sworn to protect. Night was falling over the city, but for Amanda, Rusty, and the twins, a new day was just beginning. A day full of challenges. No doubt, but also of hope and unexpected possibilities. The days that followed Amanda's revelation were an emotional roller coaster for everyone involved. Rachel, driven by the urgency to find Jason, dove headfirst into the investigation. She coordinated searches in military databases, contacted Jason's former colleagues, and scoured social media for any clues about his whereabouts. Meanwhile, at the hospital, Amanda made slow but steady progress in her recovery. Under the attentive care of Dr. Thomas and his team, she gradually regained her strength. Emily, who had become deeply attached to the story, spent much of her free time in Amanda's room, offering support and companionship. It was on a sunny afternoon about 2 weeks after Amanda's awakening. that Dr. Thomas finally gave the news everyone had been waiting for. "Amanda," he said, a gentle smile on his face, "I think it's time for you to meet your sons." Amanda's eyes filled with tears of joy and apprehension. Can I really?" Emily, who was present in the room, held Amanda's hand. "Of course you can. They've been waiting for you." Carefully, Dr. Thomas and Emily helped Amanda into a wheelchair. Rusty, as always, remained vigilant by her side, his eyes attentive to every movement. The journey to the NICU seemed to last an eternity for Amanda. Her heart was racing, a mixture of anxiety and emotion taking over her. When they finally arrived, Dr. Thomas stopped the wheelchair in front of a large glass window. "There they are," he said softly. Amanda gasped as she saw the two small cribs side by side. In them, two tiny babies, connected to various machines, slept peacefully. They were so small, so fragile, yet so full of life. "They're perfect," Amanda whispered, tears flowing freely down her face. Emily, moved, explained, "The one on the left is the one Rusty brought first. We've been calling him Ethan, and the one on the right, whom we found later, we've been calling Noah. But of course you can change the names if you want." Amanda shook her head, a trembling smile on her lips. "No, they're beautiful names. Ethan and Noah, my little warriors." Dr. Thomas placed a gentle hand on Amanda's shoulder. "They're fighters, just like you. They're making impressive progress every day." Can I touch them?" Amanda asked hesitantly. The doctor nodded. "Of course. We'll go in, but we'll have to take some precautions first." After dressing in sterile gowns, masks, and gloves, they entered the NICU. Rusty had to stay outside, but he kept his eyes fixed on the window, watching attentively. Carefully, Dr. Thomas guided Amanda's hand into the incubator where Ethan was, resting. Feeling his mother's gentle touch, the baby slightly opened his eyes. "Hello, my love," Amanda whispered, her voice choked with emotion. "Mommy's here." The scene was heartbreaking. Emily and Dr. Thomas exchanged emotional glances, both feeling the weight of the moment. After a few minutes with Ethan, they moved to Noah's crib. The baby was sleeping deeply, but at Amanda's touch, he moved slightly, as if recognizing the familiar warmth. "My boys," Amanda murmured, looking from one crib to the other. "Forgive me for not being here before, but I promise I'll never leave you again." The moment was interrupted by Rachel's abrupt arrival. She entered the NICU hurriedly, her eyes shining with a mixture of excitement and concern. "Sorry for the intrusion," she said, noticing the emotional scene, "but we have news. We've found Jason." The atmosphere in the room changed instantly. Amanda turned to Rachel, her eyes wide. You found him. Where is he?" Rachel hesitated, looking at Dr. Thomas as if asking permission to continue. The doctor nodded. "Slightly. He's in Colombia," Rachel explained. "Apparently after leaving you, Amanda, he enlisted for an international mission. He's serving at a military base near Bogota." Amanda was silent for a moment, absorbing the information. When she spoke, her voice was low but firm. Does he know about the babies?" Rachel shook her head. "Not yet. We managed to contact his superiors, but they said Jason is on an operation in the country's interior. It might take a few days until we can speak directly to him." Emily, who had remained silent, finally spoke. "What happens now?" Rachel sighed, running her hand through her hair. "Well, technically, Jason hasn't committed any crime. Abandoning a pregnant partner is morally reprehensible, but not illegal. However, he does have legal responsibilities towards the children." Dr. Thomas intervened. "I think we've had enough emotions for today. Amanda needs to rest, and so do the babies." Everyone agreed, and they slowly began to prepare to leave the NICU. Amanda cast one last look at her sons, reluctant to leave them. "You can come back tomorrow," Dr. Thomas gently assured her. "They'll be here, waiting for you." Back in Amanda's room, the group gathered to discuss the next steps. Rusty, happy to be by his protégé's side again, settled at the foot of the bed. "Amanda," Rachel began carefully, "I know this is a lot to process, but we need to know. What do you want to do regarding Jason?" Amanda was silent for a long moment, absently stroking Rusty's ears as she thought. Finally she spoke. "I don't want him back, if that's what you're asking. He abandoned us when we needed him most. But—" she hesitated, looking towards the NICU. "My children deserve to know who their father is, and he needs to take responsibility." Rachel nodded, satisfied with Amanda's mature response. "All right, we'll keep trying to contact him. In the meantime, there are some legal issues we need to resolve. You'll need a lawyer to deal with custody and child support." Emily, who had been quiet, suddenly had an idea. "My sister is a lawyer," she said. "She specializes in family law. I'm sure she'd be happy to help." Amanda looked at Emily gratefully. "Hayub, you'd do that for me?" Emily smiled, holding Amanda's hand. "Of course, we're all here for you and the boys." Dr. Thomas cleared his throat, drawing everyone's attention. "There's one more thing we need to discuss," he said seriously. "Amanda, you and the babies will still need medical care for quite some time. And, well, I imagine you don't have anywhere to go when you're discharged." Amanda lowered her eyes, shame evident on her face. I have nothing. I lost everything." "Not everything," Emily gently interrupted. "You have your children, and you have Rusty, and now you have us too." Rachel, who had been thoughtful, suddenly spoke. "I know an organization that helps mothers in vulnerable situations. They have shelter homes where you could stay with the babies until you get settled, and I'm sure we could organize a fundraising campaign to help with medical expenses and other needs." Amanda's eyes filled with tears again, but this time they were tears of gratitude and hope. I don't know how to thank all of you." Dr. Thomas smiled. "You don't need to thank us. Just focus on recovering and taking care of those two little warriors. The rest we'll figure out together." As the group continued to discuss the next steps, Rusty watched everything attentively. His gaze went from Amanda to the door, as if he understood that a new journey was just beginning. As the afternoon progressed, a feeling of determination and hope filled the room. Despite the challenges that were still to come, it was clear that Amanda wouldn't face any of them alone. Outside, the sun was beginning to set, painting the sky with shades of orange and pink. It was as if nature itself was signaling the end of a difficult chapter and the beginning of a new one, full of possibilities. Emily, looking out the window, couldn't help but think about how life could change so drastically in such a short time. Just a few weeks ago, Amanda was alone and desperate. And now she was surrounded by people willing to help, with two miraculous children fighting to grow strong. And at the center of it all was Rusty, the dog who, with his unwavering loyalty and protective instinct, had not only saved lives, but also brought people together in unexpected ways. As night fell over the city, the hospital room transformed into a symbol of hope and new beginnings. It was a powerful reminder that even in the darkest moments, light can find a way. And sometimes that light comes in the form of unconditional love, whether from a mother for her children or a dog for its human family. The following weeks passed in a whirlwind of activity. Amanda, now stronger with each passing day, divided her time between physiotherapy sessions and visits to the NICU. Emily, always present, had become a sort of guardian angel for the small family, helping with everything she could. Rachel, meanwhile, continued tirelessly in her search for Jason. After numerous calls and emails exchanged with Colombian authorities, she finally secured a date for a video call with the absent father. It was on a sunny Wednesday that the long-awaited and dreaded moment arrived. Amanda, sitting in her hospital bed, was visibly nervous. Emily held her hand, offering silent support, while Rachel set up the laptop for the call. "Remember," Rachel said softly, "you don't have to say anything you don't want to. We're here to support you." Amanda nodded, taking a deep breath. Rusty, sensing the tension in the air, rested his head on her lap, his eyes attentive and concerned. The sound of the call connecting echoed through the room. Seconds later, Jason's face appeared on the screen. He looked older, more tired than Amanda remembered. His eyes widened when he saw Amanda. "Amanda?" he asked, his voice a mixture of surprise and apprehension. What's going on?" Rachel took the initiative. "Mr. Thompson, I'm Detective Rachel Carter. We're contacting you because there's a situation that requires your immediate attention." Jason frowned, clearly confused. "What situation?" "Amanda, are you okay? Why are you in a hospital?" Amanda, gathering all her courage, finally spoke. Her voice was low but firm. "Jason, you're a father to twins." The silence that followed was deafening. Jason looked as if he had been struck by lightning, his face a mask of shock and disbelief. "Two twins," he stuttered. "But how? When?" Rachel intervened again. "Mr. Thompson, Amanda gave birth about a month ago. The babies were born prematurely and in difficult circumstances." Jason seemed to be having trouble processing the information. I didn't know. Amanda, why didn't you tell me?" The question ignited a spark of anger in Amanda. "Tell you? How could I tell you? You disappeared, Jason. You left me. Alone, pregnant, and with nothing." Tears started to stream down Amanda's face, but she continued, years of hurt and pain finally finding an outlet. "I went through hell. I lost everything. If it wasn't for Rusty, the babies and I would have died." "Rusty?" Jason asked, confused. Emily gently pulled Rusty into the camera's view. "This is Rusty," she explained. "He saved your children's lives." Jason looked at the dog, then back at Amanda, the reality of the situation finally sinking in. I'm sorry," he mumbled. "I panicked. I wasn't ready to be a father, and when you said it was twins, I ran. It was cowardly, I know." Rachel, maintaining a professional tone, interrupted. "Mr. Thompson, we understand this is a complicated situation, but the fact is you have two children who need you. There are legal and financial issues that need to be resolved." Jason nodded slowly. "I understand. I want to do the right thing. Can I see the babies?" Amanda hesitated for a moment, then nodded to Emily. Carefully, Emily adjusted the laptop and took it to the NICU. Through the camera, Jason saw his children for the first time. They're so small," he whispered, emotion evident in his voice. "They're fighters," Emily explained. "They're getting stronger every day." Back in the room, Jason looked like a transformed man. His eyes were watery and he seemed to have aged years in minutes. "Amanda," he said, his voice trembling slightly, "I know I don't deserve your forgiveness. What I did was unforgivable. But please, give me a chance to do right by our children." Amanda looked at him for a long moment. Part of her wanted to scream, to banish Jason from her life forever. But another part, the part that still remembered the man she had fallen in love with, hesitated. "I can't promise anything, Jason," she finally said. "You hurt us deeply, but our children deserve to know their father. If you're really committed to being part of their lives, then we can try to find a way." Jason nodded, tears now flowing freely down his face. "Thank you," he whispered. "I promise. I'll do everything I can to make it up to you." Rachel, sensing it was time to end the conversation, intervened. "Mr. Thompson, we'll send you all the necessary documents. We'll need you to officially acknowledge paternity and start contributing financially to the children's care." Of course, Jason quickly agreed. "I'll do whatever it takes." After a few more exchanged words and promises to keep in touch, the call ended. The silence that followed in the room was heavy, laden with conflicting emotions. Amanda let out a long sigh, as if she had been holding her breath throughout the entire conversation. Emily gently hugged her, offering silent comfort. Rachel, closing the laptop, looked at Amanda with admiration. "You were very brave," she said softly. "I know it wasn't easy." Amanda nodded, absently stroking Rusty's ears. "I don't know how to feel," she admitted. "Part of me wants to hate him, but another part is relieved that he wants to be part of the boys' lives." Emily smiled gently. "It's normal to feel confused. You've been through a lot. The important thing is that now you have options, and you're not alone anymore." As if to emphasize, "Emily's point," Rusty barked softly, rubbing his head against Amanda's hand. "No," Amanda agreed, a small smile appearing on her lips. "I'm not alone anymore." End of story.